In 1912, a little boy disappeared. 8 months later, he was found alive. But something just didn't add up. In 1912, a little boy went missing in Louisiana. What came next was a case like nothing experienced before. The strange story of Bobby Dunbar began over a century ago, but remains an unsolved mystery to this day. Robert Clarence Bobby Dunbar was born in April 1908 to Lessie and Percy Dunbar in Opelousas, Louisiana. At the age of 4, little Bobby disappeared in the night during a fishing trip with his family at Swayze Lake, Louisiana. His parents searched everywhere for their son, but he was nowhere to be found. With local police arriving on the scene, a major search began. Alligators were caught and dissected, and dynamite was thrown into the lake to see if a body would be ejected from the water. With no trace of the little boy found, a statewide manhunt continued. Percy even offered a reward of $1,000 for the return of their lost child. After 8 months, Lessie and Percy received the incredible news that their son had possibly been found. A boy matching Bobby's description had been located traveling through Mississippi with a man called William Cantwell Walters, a traveling handyman who specialized in the tuning and repairs of pianos and organs. When the authorities caught up with William, he told them the child was called Charles Bruce Anderson. Bruce was the illegitimate child of his brother and a family employee who worked as a farmhand by the name of Julia Anderson. Julia had left her son, so William said, in his care while she went away to seek work. This was a story that multiple residents of William's hometown backed up. Nonetheless, the police arrested William and took Bruce into custody. The child was then reunited with his parents. Newspaper accounts of the reunion differed, with one account describing a joyful meeting in which the boy shouted "Mother" upon seeing Lessie and running to embrace her. Another reported that the child cried and Lessie stood fretting, explaining that she wasn't sure he was her son after all. Descriptions of Bobby's reaction to seeing his younger brother Alonzo again were similarly opposing. The next day, however, Lessie Dunbar said that she had bathed the child and positively identified his moles and scars. She was now certain that the child was indeed Bobby. Bobby returned home with the Dunbars to much fanfare. Meanwhile, another mother was now facing the reality of a lost child. Julia Anderson made her way to Louisiana, adamant that the child now living with the Dunbars was not Bobby, but her son Bruce. Julia informed police that she had given her son's uncle permission to look after her child while she looked for work. In response to her claims, a lineup of children was organized, featuring boys of approximately 4 years old. The boy who had been claimed by the Dunbars as Bobby was also included. When the boy in question saw the woman who was claiming to be his mother, he offered no indication of recognition. When Julia asked if he was the child who'd been recovered, she was offered no answer. What came next is baffling to say the least. Julia, like Lessie before her, declared she was unsure that he was her son after all. The next day, she was allowed to see the child again and after undressing him, confidently claimed that he was indeed Bruce. But by this point, the damage had already been done. As well as Julia's hesitation in identifying her child, the media had started questioning the moral character of a woman who would have not one, but 3. Julia's other 2 children had died, children out of wedlock. Julia's initial hesitancy as well as the fact that the boy was by now living comfortably with the Dunbars made the courts reluctant to bring the case back up. Julia was unable to pay for any court proceedings anyhow, so found herself with no choice but to return home childless to North Carolina. Back at the Dunbar residence, Lessie and Percy now seemed certain that the child returned to them was indeed Bobby, who had settled in well, resumed playing with his brothers and seemed to recognize things in the house. All of these small signs led to William Cantwell Walters being convicted of kidnapping. Julia returned to Louisiana to attest her son's uncle's innocence. She found support in the community of Poplarville, Mississippi, where William and Bruce had spent time during their travels. Despite a number of locals testifying that they had seen William and Bruce before the disappearance of Bobby Dunbar, William was sentenced to imprisonment. After the trial, life settled down for the Dunbar family. Bobby Dunbar lived a normal life, growing up, marrying and having 4 children of his own before his death in 1966. But the story of Bobby Dunbar didn't end in 1966. It was about to get even stranger. In 2004, Bob Dunbar Jr., the son of Bobby, was asked a question by his daughter, Margaret Dunbar Cutright. Margaret had been researching her family history and she was shocked by what she found. Ideally, she wanted to prove for once and for all that her grandfather was Bobby Dunbar, and the answer was just one DNA test away. But after conversations with the children of Julia Anderson, she was starting to have doubts. Bob Dunbar Jr. agreed to the test, which compared his own DNA to another sample from his cousin, the son of Bobby Dunbar's younger brother. DNA doesn't lie. Bob Dunbar Jr. discovered he was not biologically related to any of the Dunbar family. His father had been Bruce all along, even if Bruce had himself lived the rest of his life believing he was a Dunbar. But the scientifically aided breakthrough came too late for the two people who had been wounded the most. William Cantwell Walters. After serving 2 years in prison, William's attorney successfully appealed the conviction. With the excessive costs of the first trial still fresh in their mind, prosecutors declined to try the convicted kidnapper again and instead decided to release him. He, rightly, maintained that he was innocent until his death in 1945. Julia Anderson. Julia Anderson found sanctuary among the people of Poplarville after the trial. She became a devout Christian and served as a nurse and midwife to the community. She eventually married and had 7 more children. Her children would later say that despite finding happiness in her new life in Poplarville, she never stopped speaking of her lost son, who the family always regarded to have been kidnapped by the Dunbars. What happened to the real Bobby Dunbar remains an unsolved mystery. These are a few of the most popular theories. The child did fall into the lake, where he either drowned or was eaten by an alligator. Some journalists theorized that since they readily welcomed a child into their home who wasn't theirs, Lessie and Percy Dunbar must have done something to their son, reported him missing and then taken Bruce in to cover their tracks. There were claims at the time that footprints were found leading away from the lake, with unconfirmed rumors spreading that a suspicious-looking man had been seen carrying the little boy away.